For the last 2 decades, Chattanooga baseball fans have come to see the Lookouts play at AT&T Field, but now the city has plans for a new stadium.
This is not a ballpark as you know it, where it's just going to be for the Lookouts home games. This is something to be utilized by the community.
Mayor Jim Coppinger says the new stadium will cost $70 million and take up 9 acres of this 120-acre site known as the old Wheland Foundry, with millions more invested in things like offices, restaurants, residential housing, and hotels.
Got the right people to finally develop something that's been an eyesore.
Chattanooga resident Johnny Kelly has been coming to Lookouts games for more than 30 years and is excited about the change.
I think a new stadium would be good for Chattanooga, because if we want to keep baseball in this city, we need a new ballpark. I'm for it.
But this Chattanoogan says she isn't sure this is the right public investment.
I don't know. I just don't think the city doesn't necessarily have to pay for it.
But she knows what she'd like to see in the current stadium's place.
Low-income housing, then I can live up here. I think if the city's going to pay for it, my taxes are paying for it, then there should be some benefit to the middle-class people.
Commissioner Tim Boyd expressed his reservations about the plans and how the stadium's going to be paid for at Wednesday's commission meeting.
We're talking about 30-year bonds, not 15-year bonds, which is the county generally does 15-year, but on this case it's 30-year. So that put me at 100 years old by the time this thing gets paid off.
And he's not alone. Hamilton County GOP mayoral candidate Weston Wamp also expressed his concerns on Twitter Tuesday, saying in part, quote, "Stadiums are poor public investments, and there are countless ways our county city could invest $80 million that would lead to more growth, lower violent crime, and improved public education, the most important roles of local government."
As you will hear more about today, it is partnerships and investments like these that help lift our school systems, leading to a brighter future for generations of Chattanoogans. Now, it is my esteemed honor to introduce to you Chattanooga Mayor Tim Kelly, who will lead us off with details about this catalytic project. Mayor Kelly.
Thank you, Caritza, and good morning, and thank you all for being here. I ran for mayor because I'm convinced that Chattanooga has the potential to be the best city in the country. And it's my job to make sure we live up to that potential whenever and wherever we can. For more than 2 decades, this 140 acres around us have sat vacant as a sad, rusting reminder of our wasted potential. There have been no less than 8 studies conducted on this site since 2003, but despite that, our Western Gateway has remained a blighted brownfield, doing absolutely nothing to increase jobs, tourism, or quality of life for our residents. I hear about it constantly from new residents, as many of you probably do, who've yet become accustomed to seeing it, and who rightfully don't understand why it just sits there, a wasteland and an eyesore. But I'm excited to share with you today that after years of studies and starts and stops, we now have an incredible opportunity before us to revitalize, renew, and reinvest in this historic land and the South Broad District. The city, the county, and the state are coming together with the ownership group and a world-renowned master developer to transform this site into a vibrant new community where economic opportunity and quality of life will come together. And the time is now to get this done. A plan of this scope and ambition requires an anchor tenant, of course, to catalyze further investment on the site. So the development will begin with the construction of a new multi-use stadium. This is a proven strategy that has catalyzed billions of dollars in thriving new development in multiple mid-sized cities across America. Notably, construction of a new stadium was also recommended as part of the South Broad District study, which was adopted by Chattanooga City Council back in 2018. But this is about far more than just a stadium. The stadium is just the catalyst for a larger vision to add jobs, multifamily housing, retail, and green spaces to this area and generate huge economic returns, not only for, returns for our city on the massive 130-acre site adjoining the 8 or 9 acre parcel for the stadium. Not only can we keep the Lookouts in Chattanooga, but we can do it while increasing the quality of life for our residents and breathing life back into this rusting ruin. In the coming weeks, we'll be taking some immediate steps to make this vision a reality. The city and the county will work to form a joint sports authority to own and oversee construction of the new stadium, and will seek approval from City Council and County Commission and the state of Tennessee to create a tax increment financing district to help fund the project. Upon approval, this district will allow us to use a portion of the increase in property tax revenues from the new building development to fund the majority of the bond issued to build the stadium. And by the way, for those of you that know anything about TIFs, look around. This blighted site is precisely what they were created for. It's important to note, too, that the Lookouts will help fund construction of the stadium through one of the largest annual rents in minor league baseball, $1 million a year. That's roughly 3 times more the rent than the Tennessee Titans pay for their stadium in Nashville. They'll also be responsible for the cost to maintain and operate the facility and the grounds year-round. That is more than their fair share. And the city and the county will be investing around $1.5 million each at current projections to generate a conservatively estimated $90 million in return through increased tax revenue, $40 million of which would go to our local schools over the course of the financing agreement. The bottom line is this is a great deal for the people of Chattanooga and Hamilton County. Let me tell you, I was in business for decades, and if you're lucky enough to find a deal with a projected return north of 50 times your investment, you don't hesitate, nor do you look a gift horse in the mouth. This is a golden opportunity for us to generate tens of millions of dollars in tax revenue to support growth in our schools and civic infrastructure while creating a beautiful new gateway to Chattanooga in the process. I want to thank some folks. I want to thank Senators Todd Gardenhire and Bo Watson and Representatives Yusuf Hakeem, who's here today, Patsy Hazelwood, Esther Helton, Greg Vital, and Greg Martin for their important contributions to this initiative. Thanks to their leadership, we're able to use sales tax from the stadium to help fund construction costs, and a new exit off I-24 is being built for access to the site. The project would not be possible without their partnership, so thank you again to our partners at the state. I also want to thank City Council for their ongoing partnership as we work to revitalize not only this land, but many other blighted brownfields across the city. Together, we are building brighter, cleaner, and more accessible communities for all who call Chattanooga home. So now I'll turn it over to Hamilton County Mayor Jim Coppinger to share some additional remarks. Thank you.
Well, good morning. We can't get excited today, ladies and gentlemen. We just can't get excited. I'm going to take a little different approach and speak from the heart, because I have to admit it is a little emotional as you come down here and you look at the people that actually made this happen and were so patient over all the years. So I want to start by making sure the community totally understands we're here today because the people that were with Premier Properties, Chasen family, Gary and Bobby, and Jim Stepner and others that were involved in the beginning. But they held on to this, and we should be grateful, to give us an opportunity in government to decide what we thought would be a good fit here, because as you can tell, this is our gateway to Hamilton County and to the city of Chattanooga. It is an eyesore right now, and I think that the Premier Property would agree with me if I said that. But because of them and their flexibility and holding on this property when they could have sold it many times, I think we all should be very grateful. And I wish you'd join me in a round of applause for them. And secondly, I want to thank the members of our Hamilton County Commission that are here today, led by our chairman, Sabrina Smedley, Commissioner Chip Baker, Commissioner Randy Fairbanks, Commissioner David Sharp. Without their help on these economic development projects, nothing would go anywhere, and we've been able to do a lot of projects with a lot of enthusiasm. So thank them for being here today and being open-minded from the very beginning. So what I really want to say is this is something that I've had the opportunity to be engaged with it. Everybody says since 2015. Well, 2015 was actually the first time we took a trip to Fort Wayne, Indiana to see what they had done there and the development that occurred around it. But as I saw Bill Kilbride this morning when we were talking about it, it was long before 2015 before we really actually started looking at this site. And back when Gary Chasen would come in the office and talk to the city and the county and talk about what his vision was to help us have a vision about the property. So it's been, for all of the people that say, where was the transparency and where is it, why now? Well, there's no rush to do this. absolutely, I'd like to get it done before I leave. I mean, this is something I've been involved with over a decade, right? And we've never been as close, and we've had some nibbling, but not with a master developer that Gary Chasen was able to go out, and you're going to hear from in a minute with Jim Irwin, who this is what he does. He does brownfields. He's done it successfully in Atlanta. He's doing it in Nashville. Him and his organization of New Cities Properties, along with CORE, that's done developments, over $1 billion worth of developments in Nashville. Again, have a lot of interest here, and they're going to be here to develop. So this is, Jason Fryer with Lookout. This is not just about a ball stadium, ladies and gentlemen. The ball stadium, obviously the developers have said to us, the ball stadium is the catalyst. It's going to be what attracts people down here to give us an opportunity to sell our products, which is going to be a lot of different multi-purposes, whether it's residential, whether it's retail, restaurants, all the things we all get to enjoy. And something near and dear to my heart that was mentioned early on, the Hamilton County Public Schools will start receiving $1.2 million per year when this deal is done. So we never forgive school tax for a good reason. We got to keep a good working workforce to do these jobs down here that are going to be created. So, as you can tell, and I had this discussion as recently as last night, economic development drives our schools as well. So it's not an either or. It's not do we build more schools or do we do whatever we have to do our schools, or do we do economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, we do both because they really do rely on each other. It's the taxes that we get from the development that these developers are willing to do, the additional taxes that help us to be able to support the schools and to minimize the amount of property taxes you have to pay. Now I'm just going to say this before I introduce Jim. There's a lot of discussion, and I know they're going to hopefully get into the financial part of it. A lot of misinformation, a lot of misrepresentation of what's going to actually occur here as far as the financing goes. But the amount of money that government's going to put into this project and the return on investment, as Mayor Kelly mentioned, is a big number and a big part. But people always want to talk about how much of the county taxpaying dollars are you putting into this. And usually they're talking about property taxes, right? We have the ability through other sources to put the $1.5 million that's required of the county that doesn't come from property taxes. For example, it could come from fees from ambulance services that we provide, other fees or whatever. So when people get hung up on this idea of government using taxpayer dollars to build a 70, 80 or whatever $1 million stadium that's in the next social media, just keep in mind how this will be funded. We have, as I said, really responsible people serving on the commission. That's why it's important to get it done now. These people have been laboring over this for years as well. Responsible people on the city council, and certainly with the leadership of Representative Hakeem, not only for this district or this state, we have responsible people going to make sure that the taxpayers are always looked after. So with that, what I want to say is I'm going to introduce to you a gentleman that I'm impressed with more every meeting that I'm engaged with him. His name's Jim Irwin, and I'm going to call him up here in just a minute. But just to tell you a little bit about him, I think, I don't know how Gary Chasen found him, probably through the unbelievable projects that he's done in Atlanta. But he's familiar with these types of sites. I'm sure he's going to talk about that. But he's a master developer. And so what you're going to hear today are some really conservative figures about what's anticipated here. But I think Jim would tell you that, again, he's been able to develop over $1 billion in Atlanta, and I don't know how much in Nashville. He's still working there too, as has CORE in Nashville. So we're really excited that this can be $1 billion plus. It's 120 acres. It's more acreage than he's had to work with before. I think Jim, he can touch on that. So if you look at the potential for what this can mean to our community, again, for decades, of what people will be able to come down here and enjoy and realize, and I certainly look forward to it. But with no further ado, I want to call up Jim Irwin with New Cities Properties and say thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm incredibly honored to be here. Thank you all for coming. The first thing I wanted to say is you don't need me to say this, but you all live in one of the most incredible cities and communities that I have seen in my entire career. And an incredible amount of work spanning however many 8 studies and hundreds and hundreds of people pouring their time and effort and energy into sort of imagining what this place could be over the course of decades. And so I think, as I stand here, I am deeply humbled and honored to be in this position to really help catalyze this site for the community. When New City, when we consider projects as a company, we like to say, we like to pull all the levers of complexity that you can. That really feels like a New City project. And what I mean by that is, we love working in brownfields. We love working with adaptive reuse. We love building catalytic projects that include public space, parks. The Riverwalk is a great example. And we've heard a lot of words about decrepit and all these kind of things. But when Gary brought me to the site and I looked around, we just in the first 5 minutes, I just sort of opened my eyes, and what I see here is one of the most beautiful sites I have ever seen in my entire career. Because I not only see what it is, but I can imagine in my mind what it will become. And so it's a deep, deep honor. I was joking with Gary the first time, and again in the first 30 minutes of meeting him, I was like, you don't understand, you have Disney World here. This is unbelievable. So it really, it checks all the boxes for what a site can become. And so again, we're just deeply, deeply honored that Gary and his partners in the city have entrusted us with this opportunity. So we're excited to get to work. Just maybe 30 seconds about what we'll do. It is about a catalyst project, but what we're here to do is as the master developers actually to plan and prepare for the entire 120-acre site being redeveloped. And so in addition to work that we will do on adjacent sites and vertical development that we are actively planning in parallel with the ballpark, we also will in effect bring in other developers from around the country to work on other adjacent projects so that a lot of work can be going on at the same time. So I've been very, very impressed with the city and how conservative they've been in their estimation of what's coming. You mentioned our active projects right now in Atlanta and Nashville. Both of those projects, which are under construction, will each be about $1 billion or more when we're done. Our Atlanta project is approximately 12 acres in size on the Atlanta Beltline. In Nashville, it's just under 20 acres. And so, when you look at 120 acres, we get very, very excited about the possibilities of what this will be. And again, we're actively planning all sorts of things: office, multifamily, retail, dynamic restaurants, and entertainment spaces. But really, doing all of this, the public and the private investment at the same time, is really what is absolutely necessary to catalyze this site to become what it really has the potential to be. So, I again, just incredibly honored to be here. I've probably met 10% of you and just been so deeply impressed. I look forward to meeting the rest of you and getting to work. So thank you very much for having me. And now I'd like to introduce Reverend Ann Weeks.
Thank you. Thank you. Today, this city's South Broad neighborhood is at a tipping point. Almost 3 decades ago, our newly formed South Broad Redevelopment Group began working to revitalize this neighborhood. Originally, this was a thriving community made up of predominantly African American families. They lived here, they worked here. It was a live, work, and play community. Then in the 1930s came redlining, greatly reducing the value of this community. Then in the 1950s, an interstate system came through, virtually cutting the South Broad community off from downtown. As a result, and with no economic lifeline provided to this community, it was devalued. It was isolated. It was forgotten and left to decline and decay, which it did. That is until 27 years ago, when our South Broad Redevelopment Group organized with an intent to change things and to make a difference. We've had many successes. The development you'll learn about today and in the future will be one of the biggest. I consider our work as stewardship of God's land, where everyone can thrive, where all its residents can live, work, and play again. Let's not waste this opportunity.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Ann. I don't know about you all, but I'm very excited about this opportunity and what's about to occur down here. It's kind of nostalgic as I drove in today because I had a neighbor when I was growing up and family members and church grandfathers, you should say, they used to work at U.S. Pipe. So when I came down here today, I was like, wow. You know, you see it from that side of the highway, but to come this way, it's like, oh, this has been such a wasted space. And just to hear about the opportunities that could be here are amazing. So I'm really excited. And at a time like this, when we have schools in need of renovation, and classrooms and students in need of support, and teachers in need of raises, initiatives like this one is critical to ensuring that our education system is able to not only survive, but thrive beyond measure. In times like these, we can either support schools by raising taxes or being innovative in ways such as this, like through growth. The opportunity before us allows us to grow, creating $40 million for local schools that would not otherwise exist if this land right here remained blighted and underdeveloped. The opportunity that I'm particularly excited about is to connect this project with our Hamilton County students, such as our students at the Howard School, allowing students of the Future Ready Institute there to contribute to the renewal of our South Broad community and theirs as well. They live right here in this community. I want to reiterate what you already heard today. The overwhelming majority of the funding for this project, and hear me clear on this, we are talking about 96% is coming from the project itself as it begins to take shape and renewal takes hold. This isn't a zero-sum game where money that the city and the county could use for schools is getting diverted. This is a $40 million new income for schools. Leadership means making wise investments that will benefit our children and our children's children, which will be my grandchildren, for decades to come. It means bringing partners to the table who can help us to invest in our community, to help it grow and thrive. And it means having a bold vision that will help us renew, revitalize, and reinvest in the city's future. Now is the time that we will open it up for Q&A, and I am the minute police, okay? So we're going to limit questions from 1 to 2 minutes per outlet. And then following those questions, you all will have an opportunity to take a tour of the site following the Q&A to get a vision for what will come in this space, okay? So I'm really excited about that. I'm going to turn it back over to those that can answer questions for you because I am not that person. However, I will be policing the 1 to 2 minutes for the questions.
All right, who's got questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
My question is, this development going on, black contractors gonna be an opportunity to get some of that work out here. Every time development going on, the white contractor get a job, and they hire the Mexican, then he put us on the back end. That's what my biggest concern is.
The question is around contractors, and will there be local contractors, minority contractors? Jim, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you so much. So of course, with the public investment, a lot of it will be competitively bid, I imagine, through the public procurement process, and I imagine that a lot of rules and structure will be put in place to consider all sorts of backgrounds of that nature.
When you talk about background, what do you mean by background?
I just mean, MWDBE companies and again, we're just on the very, very front end of this, but of course I think that it's an appropriate thing to consider for sure.
Other questions? Oh, here we go. Yep.
This is a question for...
And I'll try to repeat it. But...
Oh, okay, sure. This is a question for our mayors, just kind of specifically asking about the studies that we've been doing in the past because of this project. So, just kind of these funded stadiums and taxpayer-funded stadiums, what has been the return showing on investment? Sometimes isn't always what is expected. So what are we kind of seeing in the future, just from your research of previous stadiums to what we're expecting?
So the question was on these the studies that have been done on stadiums. A number of them were looked at in the 2018 study and even more recently. And what does the return look like on those, and what's the time frame on that look like?
Well, it's notable here to say, again, with apologies to Mr. Fryer and the Lookouts ownership group, that publicly funded stadiums themselves are typically bad public investments. This is not about the stadium. This is about the 120 acres around the stadium and the lift in public tax revenues that will be created with the anchor development, the catalytic development of the stadium. I can let Jermaine perhaps talk to, we have lots of data that I suppose we can share from other mid-sized cities around the country that we've looked at, but I will say this is an almost unique opportunity in that, for example, Knoxville up the road, the ancillary property there around the stadium that they're building is 8 acres, right? So that's where the opportunity is. So I frankly, I don't think, again, if you're comparing just stadium project to stadium project, you're off base. You need to be looking at a comparable deal, and there really aren't any that I'm aware of with acreage this large. You got anything to add?
I just want to add before Jermaine or maybe Brent has all the financial figures. The really exciting part about this, and I mentioned the premier property people on the front end, again, in working through this deal, unless they change their mind, they're going to donate the property for the ballpark to the city and the county. That's about $10 million if you look at what the value of the land is in this area. So again, there's been through negotiations or whatever, and the city's done a great job on this, and other people in the Lookouts have done a good job. I don't know if it was mentioned or not, but I'll reinforce the fact that the lease, I think that Mayor Kelly hit on it, the lease that what the Lookouts are doing here, the annual lease of $1 million a year, to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, is the largest amount of money that any minor league ball team has paid to lease a stadium. Is that not correct? So there's a lot of things that's been given a lot of attention and taken care of. And again, I think when you start to hear some of these numbers they unfold, you'll see exactly why it makes a whole lot of sense to take something, that was a blighted area for many, many, many decades, and to turn it into something that's going to not only benefit the residents and the schools, but for people for generations to come. Jermaine, you want to talk about the economic impact?
Yeah, so I'm Jermaine Freeman. I serve as Senior Advisor to Mayor Kelly for Economic Opportunities. And I think the best way to sort of understand this project is to understand that when you're talking about a TIF, you are talking about the potential to create future revenue that does not currently exist. All right, there's currently very little value in the site in terms of property taxes, school taxes, sales taxes. There are 0 sales taxes generated out here currently. So having the ability to create a TIF district that would sort of be around the stadium is an opportunity for us to see new development and to see a redevelopment of this area to generate significant new property tax revenue and sales tax revenue that can then support our local economy. So when you talk about how do we build more schools or how do we build more infrastructure, you have to have a growing property tax base in order to be able to do that. And so that's the point of this whole thing. From our perspective, we obviously are very excited for the Lookouts and want to see the Lookouts do well. But what we care about primarily is the new growth that will come with the anchor of the Lookouts as an anchor tenant. It's that growth and that additional economic development that gets us excited because there's the potential for so much new revenue to come into the city in an area that has been underutilized for so long.
Any other questions? Yep, in the back. When's the groundbreaking? A little early. Jim, as he mentioned in his comments, the process starts with planning, looking at an overlay for the zone. I'm sure the groundbreaking would be determined as part of that process. That'll take some months, if not longer, to go through. Other questions? Good question, though.
What's the estimated lifespan of the stadium?
Estimated lifespan of the stadium. That's a good question. Jason Fryer from the Lookouts.
Yeah, I mean, how long these stadiums last depend an awful lot on two things. It depends on how well they're designed and built on the front end, and then how well they're maintained on the back end. Our stadium, AT&T Field right now, is only about 20 years old. And the reason that it's 20 years old and it is no longer sufficient for the needs of the team is because it wasn't designed particularly well, and because there was not a great deal of maintenance or upgrades in the early years. There was the stadium, for example, built that opened the same year in Dayton, Ohio. That team just signed a new 20-year lease to 20 more years in that ballpark. We have a ballpark that we operate in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're currently in year 15. The ballpark is better now than it was the day we opened it, because since we opened it, we've put $6 million into improving that ballpark. So if you design it right, if you future-proof it in your planning, and if you invest in it, these ballparks should last minimum 50 years, potentially meaningfully more.
Yeah, I just want to add real quickly, we're talking about the ballpark, right? Talking about the Lookouts, but this is a ballpark, what we've seen in Fort Wayne, that Jason's affiliated with, and in Columbia, South Carolina, is this ballpark is going to be used, it's going to be headed up by the Sports Authority. There'll be other events other than just baseball here, and that's the whole purpose of doing what we're doing, where we're doing, is to have other events that occur here. Much like, what you saw at Finley Stadium with Kane Brown or whatever, this is a smaller venue, it's going to be a smaller venue, but there's going to be, and I want people to understand that it's not just going to be a ballpark, but most of it's up here, if you heard, and no disrespect to Jason, it's not about the ballpark for us, it's about the development. I just want to reinforce that if we're going to talk about the ballpark, we can't talk about it without mentioning the fact that it's going to be used for other purposes than just baseball.
I think most directly to your point, however, the useful life of the stadium will more than match the term of the financing and the agreement. So there's no mismatch there.
All right, good question. Any other questions? I know there's one or two back there, and this won't be the last opportunity to ask questions. You guys know how to get a hold of me, most of you, Kirsten, Mike. So we will be available. We'll also be doing a tour following this of the site as it stands today. As I think Jim alluded to, there's a preservation aspect to this, and so getting a look at some of the infrastructure that will be preserved, renewed, revitalized as part of this project is an opportunity you all have. So I'll open it up one last time for any questions.
I want to see
Yes.
y'all before y'all leave out. I want to talk to y'all about this.
You got it. One more, yep.
Is there any plan to update the roads and make it great like a freeway for stadiums?
Update the roads. Well, short answer, yes. Long answer, I'll let Jim.
Short answer is yes. In terms of infrastructure upgrades, again, while the ballpark is being designed and planned, in parallel, what we're doing is actually master planning the entire 120-acre site, which includes studying underground utilities, roadways, bike paths, street trees, and creating sort of a district where they're called covenants and restrictions, which is sort of how the entire site will be master planned. As part of that effort, one of the most fun parts of that for me is actually going out and actually spending a lot of time with you and learning about not just the history of the site, but also of the community, what works, what doesn't work, and really making this kind of that shining jewel for the city. And so yes, streets, infrastructure, all of that's part of the study that we'll be doing.
And again, in case you didn't know, thanks to the state and the federal government, we have a new exit coming right off the freeway on this side as well, notably.
All right, last call for questions. Yes. So this QR code that you saw flapping in the wind here earlier, if you scan that, there's a brand new website. I believe it's southbroad.info. Is that correct? Southbroad.info, or you can scan the QR code. That'll take you to it. What that'll run through for you is a number of the financials, some of which we went over today, if you want to do a deeper dive on those. There's also a number of frequently asked questions as well there, including some tough ones that we're taking head on. So I would encourage all of you, particularly as you get questions, to navigate over to that website, southbroad.info, and always, as I said before, reach out with any follow-up questions. So if there are no more questions here today, we'll go ahead. Oh, we've got one more.
I think I got
What is it?
I think it'd be helpful, pardon me, Mayor Kelly, for asking your CFO. I've been in several meetings with Ray Goldberg. He's worked on this quite a bit, and it was mentioned earlier, and Jermaine, they've done an unbelievable job on that, so I want to thank them publicly. But they mentioned that 96% of this is going to be funded by the project. I just want Brent to go real quickly through how we derive at that number, and the fact that the county's portion is 2%, the $1.5 million, the city's portion is 2%, but where it's all coming from, so you'll understand the taxing, whether it's in the sales tax or the property income. Please, sir.
Sure, happy to. So Caritza mentioned 96% is funded by the project itself. So that's composed of the incremental property taxes that will be generated on the site. On this site in particular, we're not using anything beyond this site in our projections. But with $350 million of development around the stadium, that will generate enough incremental property taxes that do not exist today to fund 63% of the stadium. And then the Lookouts will be paying for 22% of the stadium through their lease payments. So those two alone cover a significant portion. And then we mentioned the state allowing us to use sales tax. I see Representative Hakeem here. Thank you for that. That sales tax covers 6% of the cost of the stadium. The remainder is about 4% from parking revenues for parking at all the events. And then 1% from local sales taxes in the stadium. And that covers the 96%. That leaves 4%, 2% for the city, 2% for the county, which is $1.5 million each. And we've heard things like, why don't we just use all this money that we're going to use to build a stadium to go build schools? We're talking about $1.5 million. Everything else currently does not exist currently. And that $1.5 million from the county, is not going to build a school anywhere. It's not even going to buy a really good HVAC anywhere. But that $1.5 million investment from the county in particular, and then another $1.5 million from the city, but that $1.5 million generates over $1.2 million per year for the school system for the next 30 years. So, the school board can do what they want with that new revenue, but that could go to maintenance, it could go to teachers, it could go to whatever the school board thinks it needs to go to. So, while it is a very small investment on the county's part as well as the city, it does generate tremendous new revenues for the school district. And if development goes to $500 million, which we expect it will, we're obviously being conservative with our $350 million development numbers. If it gets to $500 million, we're talking about $55 million for schools. If it gets to $1 billion over time, we're talking about over $100 million in new revenues for schools, because the school portion of all those property taxes don't go into construction, they don't go into anything. They just go straight to the school district, which is what we require for all incentives.